This Penn State defense is actually better than last year's.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Penn State's defense in 2024 is better than the 2023 edition. There is an underlying reason for it that not enough people are actually talking about, so we'll discuss it and also highlight key performances, both positive and negative, from week one against West Virginia. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch. Every single day, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5. That's all it takes. And you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'd appreciate it if you left a like on this episode, but more importantly, be a part of the conversation. Let me know down in the comments if you think this 2024 defense is in fact better than the 2023 defense that was coached by Manny Diaz, was at the top of a lot of categories. I can't help but think, no, that this 2024 group is better than last year's group. Now, why is that the case? This Penn State defense is better because it's full of star power, playmakers across the board, and more overall depth. That's really it. You have more elite playmakers and more depth to go along with it on this defense, and there really isn't that much of a drop-off from coordinators, from Manny Diaz to Tom Allen. They clearly, at least from what we saw in week one, Tom Allen can provide the same similar impact that Manny Diaz did as the defensive coordinator. But Penn State this time around has playmakers simply at every single position, and more so than the 2023 group. And that's really saying something. That is really saying something, because this is a roster that had Chop Robinson, who was a first-round pick, Adisa Isaac, who was a third-round pick, Curtis Jacobs, who for some reason went undrafted, but Curtis Jacobs really did have an excellent performance his final year at Penn State. And then in addition to younger versions of Abdul Carter, KJ Winston, Dani Dennis-Sutton. But now I'm talking about true disruptive playmakers. Johnny Dixon, Kalen King, Daquan Hardy were good, but they weren't that superstar caliber that you can mention Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac and Curtis Jacobs within that Penn State defense from a season ago. So you lose those players that I named, but now you have a more experienced Abdul Carter, a more experienced KJ Winston, a more experienced Dani Dennis-Sutton, all back with bigger, faster, stronger than ever before, and that superstar ability. All three of those players could easily be first-round picks in next year's NFL draft. Then you have Zane Durant, who had quite a performance against West Virginia. Devon J. Thomas has now become more disruptive on the interior alongside Durant. Then there's Tony Rojas, Jaylen Reed, who were flying around to the football almost, it seemed like, every single play, in addition to a more experienced Kobe King. Then you add in the two-time captain and Dom DeLuca, A.J. Harris, and Jalen Kimber, who came from the transfer portal, and an improved Zach Wheatley, who's been talked about a lot in the offseason. And those are just the starters. I've expressed my concern about the linebacker depth, but separate that conversation from this. In terms of the overall defense, overall, there is more depth in this group. You look at the defensive line, you look at the secondary, they are stacked with purely capable Big Ten players. They might not be superstars in their own right, maybe in the future, but you have the depth. Okay, so Smith Vilbert, Amin Vanover, Keziah Izzard along that defensive line. Alonzo Ford, who was lost a season ago due to injury, is back and better, and he is improved. Hakeem Beeman's in that conversation as well. Cam Miller, Audavian Collins. Elliott Washington, second-year cornerback, had an interception. Penn State's defense is not just this top 10 group that we've been characterizing them as. They are even more talented than last year's group, and Tom Allen has an opportunity to prove that he's just not a replacement, but maybe even the similar caliber or an upgrade over Manny Diaz. And that is crazy to think. That is crazy to say out loud when Manny Diaz accomplished as much as he did in 2023. The bar is set high, but this Penn State group can absolutely meet it. So let's look at the numbers, right? That's all great, but Zach, that's your opinion. Well, let's look at the numbers to compare. So Penn State's run defense was number one a season ago, too. That, like I said, they led in a lot of different categories or were top 5 in other ones. Analytics or actual, your regular basic stats. Here's one of them. Number one a season ago in terms of yards per carry, 2.2 yards per carry. Anytime, and I always like to preface this, anytime you are looking to get a measure of a team's offense or defense, look for yards per pass, yards per rush, both offensively and defensively, and you actually get a really good measure of how talented a team is. West Virginia has one of the best rushing attacks in the country from not only a season ago, but they returned a lot of that talent into this year's group. They returned 3 different rushers, including the quarterback and Garrett Green, who all totaled each 750 yards or more in 2023. Sounds like that's great, a lot of room for improvement right there to capitalize on 2023 success. And this defense in 24 held them to 85 total yards and 2.3 yards per carry in Morgantown. They did that on the road. So a prolific rushing offense that I think had a 16 game streak of 150 yards or more on the ground. That was snapped by this Penn State defense. Now let's compare. In 2023 at Penn State in Beaver Stadium, West Virginia had 146 yards and 3.7 yards per carry. I think that's a stark difference. That's almost half the total taken away by this 2024 group on the road. West Virginia's offense, if you can believe it, Penn State's defense certainly made them look bad, but West Virginia's offense they're capable. They're a solid group. Top 15 offensive line in the nation. 3 capable runners at any given time between Jaheim White, Garrett Green, and CJ Donaldson, a veteran group with just pure experience and an experienced quarterback leading that group. They are solid, and Penn State shut it down on the road. There were about 3 elite playmakers on the 2023 defense, and depending on who you ask, maybe a couple more. But 2024's group might have 8 or 9, depending on who you ask. If you ask me, as the host of Locked On Nittany Lions, Abdul Carter, Dani Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, Devon J. Thomas, Kobe King, Tony Rojas, AJ Harris, KJ Winston, and Jaylen Reed. Those guys have NFL futures ahead of them, and it's not to say that anybody else doesn't. But these players that showed up showed elite playmaking ability against a capable West Virginia offense in week 1. And that is not to discredit Dom DeLuca or a Jalen Kimber, Cam Miller in that rotation at cornerback, Zach Wheatley as well, who had a very strong offseason. But when I look at the starters on defense and compare them to the group a season ago that had Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, and a lot of similar names, but now they're all back. Abdul Carter and KJ Winston, right? Kobe King, Dom DeLuca, all those names that were strong contributors a season ago are now back and better than ever and have that elite playmaking ability in addition to the other changes that Penn State's defense made. Now, there is one underlying reason why this defense is better in 2024. For some reason, not enough people are talking about it. So let's discuss it on the other side of this break. And today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to its peak performance. You have superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. And whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car into that MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. That is ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. That underlying reason for why the defense is better in 2024 actually has nothing to do with the defense. It's the offense. Andy Kotelnicki, Drew Aller, the offensive group. And the word I want to use here is symmetry. The offense and the defense work hand in hand with one another. Now, I know that's not rocket science, but two good units here on a football team can actually make for a great team if they're able to complement one another. Let me explain what I mean by that. So last season, the offense could not get out of its own way to help the defense out. And I'm talking about sustaining drives, playing with hefty leads. Sure, that was against weaker competition, but Penn State, even against in the games of Northwestern, Illinois, right, it really took some time for the offense to pull away from whatever opponent. And what that does, that kind of limits when you're talking about inspiring confidence in a defense, right? Those two groups play off of one another. A defense is, I like to think of it as a wrecking ball. You're trying to destroy your opposing offense's game plan. And when you can't do your job with confidence that the offense is going to at least give you a break, you're not going to be as successful as you should be. So under the circumstances, I kind of mentioned that passively in the first segment, that Manny Diaz orchestrated this really elite overall defense that was number one in a lot of categories and top 5, top 10 in other ones as well, given the circumstances that the offense just didn't help you out, just didn't pull its side, just didn't carry its side of the weight, right? Long story short, Penn State's offense didn't do that last season. They didn't allow the defense to have time to rest by having those long drives. Sure, selectively they were able to do that, but not consistently. That also took away from building momentum. Think about the times that the defense would create a short field, make a big play, fourth down, turnover on downs, an actual turnover itself, and the offense just wouldn't capitalize on that turnover, would not capitalize on a short field to work with. The defense always bailed out the offense in 2023, and it was never the other way around. So you can see why subconsciously that's not going to inspire a lot of confidence. So if the defense didn't play a perfect game, Penn State was not in a position to win, as we saw. Michigan, Ohio State. I mean, for crying out loud, the defense did play a perfect game against Ohio State, and it still wasn't enough. That's my point. We saw it. There were tangible results that we can point to say that, you know what, the offense never bailed out the defense, really. But in 2024, we see a different version of that. We saw an early glimpse of what Penn State's offense can do and will continue to get better at. The first part of it is the scoring at will. The offense scored in 22 seconds to finish up the first half. 22 seconds. Defense makes a good stop, right? I think the fourth down conversion, we don't need to talk about that. I already discussed that in the live recap. But you hold West Virginia to a field goal. That is a win in the mind of the defense. You hold them to 3 points instead of 7 to close out the half. And you got to go into the tunnel thinking, okay, it's going to be 13-6 here. At least we have a 7-point lead. Wrong. Penn State's offense with 22 seconds marches right down the field, puts up another 7, and it's 20-6 going into halftime as opposed to 13-6. You have a 2-score lead. So that's what I'm trying to describe here. That inspires confidence, that inspires momentum, and then the defense can start to do its thing and be more of a wrecking ball rather than kind of playing cautious, like, okay, we don't want to make that big mistake. You now have room, you now have a margin for error to make. So think of those penalties, the offsides, a late hit out of bounds penalty here and there, some pass interference calls that were made. Granted, some of these calls came later in the game, but that's my point, is that Penn State's defense could play freely as opposed to, again, all right, we got to avoid making a big mistake if we get a little over aggressive here. So yes, they had those couple of penalties, but it didn't cost them anything, and Penn State's defense could play comfortably. Then sustaining drives. That's the second part of it. James Franklin pointed this out in the halftime interview on Fox and said, when he spoke to Jenny Taft, and said that the offense was actually not a direct quote, but implying that they were playing a little bit too fast. We need them to sustain a drive to just give the defense a break. The defense is constantly on the football field, and it's nice because Penn State's offense is scoring, but at the same time, you're not helping your defense out. And then eventually, especially against a team like West Virginia, that type of game plan where they like to be physical. They capitalize on moments like that. It didn't happen this time around, but against other inferior opponents, West Virginia will be able to do that. But this conversation isn't about the Mountaineers. Bottom line is the offense needs to be able to help out the defense and give them a break by sustaining drives. So that didn't happen immediately, but in the second half, you saw Penn State's offense and the way that Andy Kotelnicki was calling plays, that it started to work itself out. 10 plays plus, keeping the drive going on third downs, not forcing any punts, or not allowing West Virginia to force punts, I should say. So they settled down and they did just that. The fact that Penn State's offense can go from slow-paced, sustain a drive, be methodical, to lightning quick. They can score literally in almost 20 seconds is going to just give an insane boost to Penn State's defense for a team that, again, that's just high energy. A lot of those guys are just high energy, good, passion, highly emotional players, and Tom Allen's the same way. Manny Diaz was like that with his aggressive style of defense, but Tom Allen, I think, is like that in a sense with his personality too. I don't know Manny Diaz personally, but just from interacting with Tom Allen and what the players say about him in interviews, that he inspires that passion with how intense he is as a defensive coordinator to speak on what Allen is doing in the present at Penn State. So all of these things come together. The actual elite playmaking ability to the depth of the defense to now the offense gives that group a chance to rest, relax, reload, and play at 110% throughout the course of a game, rather than playing at 50%, if you will, based on what we saw in 2023. And that's still pretty impressive that Manny Diaz's group did that under the circumstances. But now Penn State's defense has everything going for it, from not only itself as a group to the complementary parts of the whole team and the whole roster. Best individual performances from week one against West Virginia. There are not some surprising names, but reassurance from those names that I mentioned earlier really stood out against West Virginia. There was one negative performance, though, that we do need to highlight, and we'll talk all about it next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers, that's right, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5. That's all it takes, $5. And you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So there's no obligation. And all you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com. And if you look over at FanDuel.com, you can see the lines for Penn State versus Bowling Green. Penn State is a hefty favorite, 34.5 points against the Falcons. The total is set at 48.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them right now at FanDuel.com. Once again, that's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. To wrap things up, we'll merge the eye test, the stats, and the analytics all together here to get an understanding of who had the best performances against West Virginia in week one from Penn State's defense. And Elliott Washington actually had the best game in terms of analytics, according to PFF. Now, this had to do in part to his coverage, his late game interception, but he actually graded as Penn State's best overall defender. Personally, if you're asking me, I thought Jaylen Reed had the best game. He was either making a play or he was near the play every single time. You saw James Franklin in a post-game video go up to Jaylen Reed and just said, hey, you look different, you look faster, and you were all over the football field. So it's consistent. Reed really did look like an NFL caliber player against West Virginia. The analytics back it up. He was the second best graded player by Pro Football Focus. And the stats say this: 9 tackles, 2 passes defended, and a fumble recovery. I would argue that Jaylen Reed had the best overall game, eye test, statistics, and the grades and the analytics themselves. KJ Winston statistically had the best game, and in terms of accolades too, was recognized as the Big Ten Player Defensive Player of the Week, the Chuck Bednarik Player of the Week as well. 12 tackles and a forced fumble. So he did lead the team in tackles, and KJ Winston was up there in terms of analytics as well. But Winston overall had the best performance in the box score on defense. AJ Harris logged the most snaps at cornerback and had the best overall coverage grade out of the entire secondary. So Jaylen Reed, KJ Winston, factoring in a Jalen Kimber, a Cam Miller, and Elliott Washington had a good game, but AJ Harris had the best overall coverage grade. Smith-Vilberg graded out by far as the best pass rusher, according to Pro Football Focus, and it really wasn't even close. Penn State's pass rush was a little lacking. James Franklin addressed that in his press conference because they only had 2 sacks overall. Smith-Vilberg had one of them, that forced fumble that Dani Dennis-Sutton recovered later in the game. It was a business decision by Garrett Green. Abdul Carter got a good hit on him early in the game when they were chasing after a fumble. And then he saw Dani Dennis-Sutton, 6'6" Dani Dennis-Sutton, chasing after the football with him, and he said, "You know what? I'm good. We're down by a bunch. Don't need to risk getting hit again here." Zane Durant's in this conversation as well. Another player that, in terms of the box score, might not have impressed everybody. It impressed me because defensive tackles don't typically pad the stat sheet unless you're an Aaron Donald or an Ndamukong Suh that can light up the stat sheet in the box score. It's typically difficult to do that as a defensive tackle. You're typically double teamed, being on the interior. Your job is to essentially block for the linebackers, but Zane Durant made plays. Zane Durant did show up in the box score, had a sack, had 4 tackles, and someone that's emerging as a true star playmaker in his 3rd season. Had lofty expectations as a true freshman when he enrolled early, and you're starting to see that development fully take place and in the present here. So Zane Durant, I think more of an eye test rating here, but had a very good performance against West Virginia. Now, I was disappointed. This is where we will finish. I was disappointed in Abdul Carter's performance, but this is nothing to worry about. This is just an honest assessment. He did not play well. And I'm not referring simply to, well, he had a couple offsides penalties. He was jumping ahead of the snap. He had the late hit out of bounds. He really wasn't flying to the football like some of the other defenders were. This doesn't have to do with the penalties. That obviously did not help his case, but Carter only had 1 tackle, no sacks. He was an integral part of forcing that early return fumble. Nick Dawkins, Drew Aller had the fumble, right? With West Virginia's defense clapping before the snap. That caused a miscommunication, and then they fumbled it. And then on the bad snap by West Virginia center, Abdul Carter was one of the first ones to disrupt the play by chasing down Garrett Green and forcing the ball to just continue to roll away so that Jaylen Reed could go and get it. Outside of that, Carter didn't really do anything except those penalties, those mistakes that weren't egregious at the end of the day. The point above all of it, though, is that this isn't a concern. Carter is making adjustments here, now being a full-time defensive end. That is a big change, especially at high school is one thing. That's a big change in high school. It's an even bigger change in college or the NFL. When you go from playing off-ball linebacker, I understand there are similarities to the position with the way that Penn State utilizes that linebacker spot to chase after the quarterback and essentially be a stand-up pass rusher at points in time. But when you're a 4-2-5 or a 4-3 defensive end, that is night and day compared to being a stand-up linebacker that's going to drop into coverage and do a lot of other things and have to know other aspects of the defense as opposed to being just a true defensive end, which is what Abdul Carter is. He's a true defensive end. He's that replacement for Chop Robinson. They're going to line him up in a myriad of ways. The bright side is Carter's a superstar still in his own right, just given his overall athletic ability and his talent when it comes to the sport of football. He will get better. He will get a lot better. Temper your expectations for him. If you're looking at that and saying he had a bad game, he had 1 tackle, he didn't get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Sure, he helped force that fumble, but other than that, he was either non-existent or showing up in the game in the wrong ways. Temper your expectations because, like a rookie, with him now playing a new position, this is someone that is going to need time to fully get adjusted. And I know he's been working on it since April and had the off season, but you don't just learn everything overnight. Allow him time to get to the middle part of the season, and that's when you can expect him to be a true superstar, a disruptor on defense once again, but now at defensive end. So there is optimism here. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Defensive takeaways in the books. A lot to talk about from this West Virginia game, especially since Bowling Green, Kent State, even Illinois and UCLA, that next true test isn't going to be until that plane trip to Southern California when they play the USC Trojans. So still to come on Locked On Nittany Lions. We will preview that game again. It's still a game. You got to go 1-0. We will preview and discuss Bowling Green and what they will have planned for Penn State this upcoming week, along with post-practice interviews and everything else that you can expect here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Please leave a like on this episode. I'd really appreciate it. Be a part of the conversation. Let me know your thoughts on the Penn State defense after week 1. And if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And once again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen, you got to check out Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin. College football is here, it's back, and there's been upsets like Florida State in back-to-back weeks. Absolute craziness with this new landscape of college football between NIL and the transfer portal. You now have the conference realignment and the expanded college football playoff that's waiting on the horizon, and Spencer is previewing it, analyzing it, and recapping all of it when it comes to college football. And that's why it's called Locked On College Football. Available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.